There is a cemetery in San Diego, California called Mount Hope. It's a simple place. Ancient trees, rows of headstones that few people visit anymore. The kind of silence that only exists where time has decided to stop counting. And somewhere in those rows, in a discreet grave, without a plaque, without flowers, buried next to the woman he loved his entire life, rests a man you were never supposed to forget. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a general. He wasn't a billionaire. He was a scientist. For 40 years of his life, this man built with his own hands the most advanced scientific instruments humanity had produced up to that point. He saw, for the first time in history, what no other human being had managed to witness. He identified a biological trigger for one of our greatest health challenges, decades before anyone else received credit for it. And he developed a way to neutralize that agent, without toxins, without surgery, without radiation, and without side effects, using nothing but precisely calibrated electromagnetic frequencies. In 1934, 16 terminal cases were treated with his technology. All 16 recovered, a 100% success rate, documented, signed by medical professionals, supervised by the University of Southern California. And then, in the following years, this man was systematically destroyed. Financially ruined, isolated. His laboratory was burned to the ground. His records vanished. His allies were either bought off or silenced. His partners were imprisoned. And he spent the last 30 years of his existence in poverty, drinking to forget a lifetime of work that the world decided to erase. He died in 1971, without recognition, without money, without a single newspaper article mentioning his passing. His name was Royal Raymond Rife. And before you say this sounds like just another conspiracy theory, I need you to stay, because what you are about to hear is not speculation. It is documented history, and by the time you finish this video, you will understand exactly why it was never taught in schools. To understand what Royal Rife achieved, you must first understand where he came from. Because there is something in the trajectory of certain individuals that only makes sense when you know their beginning. And Rife's beginning is, at once ordinary and brutal. May 16th, 1888, a town called Elkhorn in Douglas County, Nebraska. Of Scottish descent, he was the son of a mechanical engineer from Ohio named Royal Raymond Rife Sr. and a woman from Iowa named Ida Mae Cheney. The baby was born healthy. The mother was not. When Royal was only 8 months old, Ida Mae passed away. 8 months. He was still crawling. He hadn't said a single word. He understood absolutely nothing of what was happening around him. And what was happening was that the one person who was supposed to be the center of his world had ceased to exist. His father, overwhelmed by work shifts that reached 16 hours a day, the kind of routine a mechanical engineer in the American heartland of the late 19th century needed to survive, couldn't raise the boy alone. He handed the child to his sister, Nina Colber Rife Dryden, who would become the only mother figure Royal would ever know. Detailed records of this childhood don't exist. What we have are fragments. But these fragments say something vital. There was a different kind of mind growing up in rural Nebraska. A mind that didn't just ask questions, but when it didn't find a satisfactory answer, would go out and build the instrument to find it. This combination, absolute curiosity, a vocation for building, and an intolerance for existing limitations, is the signature of a very specific kind of genius. The kind that has no patience to wait for the world to evolve. The kind that prefers to accelerate the process alone. In 1905, at 17, Royal Rife graduated high school and entered Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. For those unfamiliar with the institution, Johns Hopkins, at the turn of the 20th century, wasn't just a good university. It was the gold standard by which all Western medicine was measured. It was where the best were trained. It was where the most advanced research in the world happened. And the boy from Nebraska, raised by his aunt, without a mother, without an inheritance, without a famous last name, was there? He began by studying ophthalmic surgery. The logic was direct. Operating on eyes meant working with the part of the human body dedicated to vision. Rife had, from an early age, an almost obsessive relationship with the idea of seeing what others could not. But something shifted his course. The microscope. It wasn't just an instrument. For Rife, the microscope represented a door. On the other side of that door existed an entire universe, bacteria, fungi, and pathogens that lived inside the human body, caused ailments, destroyed lives, and remained completely invisible to anyone without the right tools. Millions of people were suffering from things that couldn't be seen, and therefore couldn't be fought. For Rife, this was an unacceptable problem, and his life, from that moment on, would become a relentless attempt to solve it. Bacteriology led Rife to optics with an inescapable logic. To study microbes effectively, you need lenses. And the best lenses in the world at the turn of the century came from a single manufacturer, Carl Zeiss Optical Works. Founded in Germany in 1846, while still a student at Johns Hopkins, Rife began working part-time at the Zeiss offices in New York. There, he worked directly under Hans Luckel, the company's senior optical engineer. He didn't just learn how to use the instruments. He learned why they worked the way they did, where their limits were, and exactly what would be required to surpass them. Later, he traveled to Europe and spent time working in the Zeiss laboratories themselves in Heidelberg, Germany. It was there that he performed work that signaled the level of precision that would define his entire career, Rife personally, and manually produced all the photomicrographs for the University of Heidelberg's Atlas of Parasites. These were photographs taken through a microscope, documenting tiny organisms with a clarity and rigor that surpassed any similar work of that era. Each image required hours of positioning, light adjustment, and lens calibration. It was the kind of work that demanded the patience of a monk and the precision of a master watchmaker. The University of Heidelberg was so impressed that, in 1914, when Rife was only 26 years old, they awarded him an honorary doctorate in parasitology. Think about what that means. This wasn't a bought degree or a routine gesture. It was one of the oldest and most respected universities in the world, formally stating, "This man has achieved something no one else has, and he was only getting started." In 1912, Rife moved to San Diego, California. He was 24. He married Mamie Quinn, daughter of R. Quinn, the legendary mayor of San Diego's Chinatown. He set up his first research laboratory and began building, with his own hands, what would become the foundation of one of the most extraordinary and most tragically interrupted scientific careers on record. But before we talk about what Rife built in that lab, we must talk about how that lab was made possible. Because the story of how Royal Rife secured his funding is, in itself, a perfect portrait of who he was. At a certain point during those early years in San Diego, Rife's resources ran dry. Research was expensive. Equipment was costly. The funding sources he had relied on were simply not enough for the scale of what he envisioned. So he took a job that, on paper, seemed like a humiliating step down for someone with his credentials. He became the private chauffeur for Henry Timken. The name Timken might not be a household word today, but at the time, it was one of the most recognized names in the American industrial world. Henry Timken was the founder of the Timken Roller Bearing Company, the manufacturer of the finest ball bearings in the country. Timken bearings were in cars, trains, and industrial machinery. The company was worth a fortune. Henry Timken was a seriously wealthy man, and Royal Rife, the scientist with the doctorate from Heidelberg, moved into a small apartment above, Timken's garage. There is something almost seismic about that image. The man who was about to build the most powerful microscope in human history, sleeping above someone's garage. But this is the kind of detail often found in the stories of truly extraordinary people. The arc doesn't always go straight up, it dips. And then it rises in a way no one expected. Timken was a curious man. When he discovered who the chauffeur living upstairs really was, he didn't fire him. He was fascinated. The first proof of Rife's brilliance came in a mechanical context. Timken owned a racing boat called the Kitty Hawk, and there was an engine problem that his top engineers couldn't solve. Rife analyzed the system, designed a new 2,700 horsepower engine, and the boat went on to shatter speed records off the California coast. The second proof was industrial. Microscopic irregularities in the steel of the bearings produced by Timken's factory were causing field failures, costing a fortune in returns and repairs. Rife designed and built from scratch an X-ray machine capable of automatically inspecting every part leaving the production line, identifying and discarding any defective component before it reached a customer. This saved the company millions of dollars. Then came the third moment, the most personal one. Timken's wife had been ill for months with a condition that had no clear diagnosis. The doctors attending to her couldn't find the cause. It was Rife, not the doctors, who performed a detailed inspection of the family's kitchen and identified the problem. It was a specific agent in the food she consumed regularly. Something no one else had thought to look for. Mrs. Timken recovered. And when she passed away years later in 1940 from unrelated causes, she left Royal Rife $50,000 in her will to ensure his research continued. Timken went even further. Along with his partner, Bridges, he funded the construction of a state-of-the-art laboratory in Point Loma, San Diego. It featured animal surgical suites, pathology rooms, microscopes of every kind, and a precision machine shop where Rife could manufacture any part he needed. At its peak, Rife had 12 laboratory assistants. It was in this laboratory, funded by a wealthy man who had learned to respect the genius living above his garage, that the history of medicine was about to be rewritten. To understand what Rife built, you must first understand the limits that existed before him. In 1916, when Rife was beginning his research in San Diego, the most powerful optical microscope in the world could magnify objects up to 2,500 times. With that magnification, you could see fungi, you could see parasites, you could see many types of bacteria, but viruses, it was considered impossible. Viruses were simply too small. They were smaller than the wavelength of visible light. This wasn't just a technological hurdle. It was a fundamental law of physics that scientists of the time believed to be insurmountable. Physics dictated that you simply could not see something smaller than the wavelength of light you were using to illuminate it. And there was a second problem, just as severe, even for organisms that microscopes could see. The very process of observation killed the subject. The chemical stains used to dye samples and make them visible were toxic. Even the electron microscopes, which would be developed decades later, operated in vacuum chambers with high-energy electrons, making it impossible to observe living organisms. It was like trying to study the behavior of a fish by taking it out of the ocean, placing it on a metal plate and saying, "There, it's analyzed." Rife understood that the problem wasn't just magnification. It was illumination. Every molecule, every biological structure has a specific frequency of light with which it resonates. When you expose it to exactly that frequency, it emits its own light signature, as if it suddenly began to glow with its own color. Rife called this the spectroscopic signature. If you could identify the spectroscopic signature of a virus, the frequency of light that corresponds exactly to the chemical structure of that organism, and then illuminate the sample with precisely that frequency, the virus would literally appear, visible, living, moving, not killed by stains and not destroyed by electrons. To achieve this, Rife needed an illumination system that no one had ever built before. So he went out and built it himself. The process took years. Rife worked in sessions that lasted up to 20 consecutive hours, not because he was a masochist, but because calibrating a microscope of this complexity required a level of patience most people have never experienced. A tiny shift in the angle of a prism changed everything. A single degree of difference in light incidence could erase what had just appeared. The system Rife developed was based on block crystal quartz prisms, a material specifically chosen because quartz allows ultraviolet radiation to pass through without absorbing it, unlike common glass. He used two counter-rotating prisms, mounted face-to-face in a system called a Risley prism, which could be rotated with vernier control through 360 degrees in opposite directions. By adjusting the angle between them, Rife created a spectrum of light that gradually swept from infrared to ultraviolet. And when that spectrum reached the exact resonance frequency of the organism under observation, the organism emerged from the shadows, visible, in color, alive. Rife called this process heterodyning, a technique borrowed from radio engineering, where two different frequencies are combined to produce a third frequency within the visible spectrum, even if the original two were beyond human vision. In 1920, Rife finished his first microscope, powerful enough to see a living virus. For the first time in human history, a person looked through an optical instrument and saw, moving, reproducing, and transforming in real time, an organism that until then existed only as a theoretical inference. In 1933, he presented the world with what he called the universal microscope. It contained 5,682 individual components. It had a magnification capacity of 60,000 times and a resolution of 31,000 diameters. For comparison, the best microscopes of the era reached only 2,500. The universal microscope utilized every type of illumination: polarized, monochromatic, dark field, ultraslit, and infrared. It was simultaneously the most powerful and the most versatile optical instrument ever built. And unlike any electron microscope that would follow, it allowed for the observation of organisms that were completely alive and in motion, without any preparation that could alter or kill them. The Smithsonian Institution, in its 1944 annual report, described the universal microscope as an instrument equipped for transmitted and monochromatic dark field, polarized and ultra-slit illumination, including a special device for crystallography. This wasn't informal praise. It was one of the world's most respected scientific institutes putting on paper, officially, that this existed and functioned. Doctors and scientists from the most important American institutions, Northwestern, Mayo USC, traveled to San Diego to look through Rife's microscope. Most left speechless. Some spent an entire day trying to adjust the focus without success, not because the instrument didn't work, but because reconfiguring one's vision to see a world the brain had never processed before took time. One of Rife's collaborators, Dr. Arthur Kendall, described the experience as similar to learning how to see for the very first time. Royal Raymond Rife had built a window into a universe that humanity had never been able to see. The question now was, what was he seeing inside? The greatest discovery Rife made through his microscope wasn't just visual, it was conceptual. And it challenged one of the pillars of medical thought so radically that, on its own, it was enough to create powerful enemies. Since Louis Pasteur established the germ theory in the late 19th century, Western medicine had adopted a principle called monomorphism. The idea was simple. Every ailment was caused by a specific fixed microbe. The tuberculosis bacterium was always the tuberculosis bacterium. The flu virus was always the flu virus. These organisms did not change form. They were stable, predictable, and categorizable. It was a comforting idea, and an entire pharmaceutical industry was built upon it. Because if every challenge has a fixed, specific microbe, then for every microbe, you can create a specific product. A targeted treatment, a vaccine. The model was clean. It was patentable. It was extremely profitable. The problem was that Rife, looking through his microscope, was seeing something completely different. He was witnessing organisms transforming. A bacterium becoming a virus, a fungus assuming the characteristics of a bacterium, forms that changed depending on the environment they were in, the pH levels, the temperature, the presence or absence of certain nutrients. The same organism, under different conditions, expressing entirely different forms. This was called pleomorphism. It wasn't a new idea. A French scientist named Antoine Béchamp had argued for this perspective decades earlier. In an intellectual battle with Pasteur himself, that official history decided to end in Pasteur's favor. But what Rife was doing was different from a theoretical argument. It was direct observation, in real time, filmed, photographed, documented with a level of rigor only possible with an instrument like the universal microscope. Rife wasn't alone in this observation. Dr. Arthur Kendall, director of medical research at Northwestern University, reached the same conclusions independently. Dr. Edward Rosenau of the Mayo Clinic, a global authority in bacteriology, confirmed Rife's findings in his own labs and published an article about it in the journal Science in August 1932. But the medical establishment, led by voices from Harvard and the American Medical Association, refused to listen. One of the loudest opponents was Dr. Thomas Rivers of Harvard, who had never visited Rife's lab and had never looked through the universal microscope, yet publicly declared that the forms Rife and Kendall claimed to see simply did not exist. His logic was circular and perfectly impenetrable. Since my microscope doesn't show this, it doesn't exist. What no one said out loud, but what everyone involved likely knew, was what was truly at stake. If pleomorphism were real, if organisms could change form depending on the internal environment of the body, if health was not just a matter of contact with an external germ, but also the internal balance of the host, then the entire logic of medicine based on Pasteur's model, one germ, one ailment, one drug, would crumble, and along with it, billions of dollars in patents, research, and political influence. But Rife wasn't focused on the money. Rife was focused on the ultimate health challenge. Rife's formal research into the ultimate health challenge began in 1922. What he embarked upon was one of the most meticulous, obsessive, and physically exhausting endeavors in American scientific history. The problem was one of scale. The viral agent, if such an agent existed, would be even smaller than any organism Rife had managed to see until then. Smaller than anything any microscope of the era could detect. To find it, Rife first had to develop a suitable culture medium to grow it in the lab, then find the exact configurations of the universal microscope to make this specific organism visible, and finally confirm beyond a shadow of a doubt that what he was seeing was indeed the biological trigger, and not just an accidental contaminant. Rife performed over 20,000 experiments attempting to observe the transition of healthy cells into a compromised state. 20,000. That is not rhetorical exaggeration. It is the number Rife himself documented. Most failed. Some came close. None were conclusive until 1932. In 1932, using a special culture medium developed by Dr. Kendall called K-medium, which allowed certain organisms to grow in conditions that conventional media could not support, Rife finally isolated what he was looking for. It was a tiny, oval-shaped organism, approximately 50 nanometers long. A nanometer is a billionth of a meter. Its color, when viewed through the universal microscope at the correct resonance frequency, was a distinct purplish red. Rife documented the exact refraction angle, 12.3 degrees. He documented the refraction-based chemical staining. He documented the size, 1/5 of a micron long, 1/20th of a micron wide. No conventional microscope, even well into the 1980s, would have been able to see this organism. Rife named it the BX virus. To confirm that the BX virus was indeed the primary biological trigger, he did what any rigorous scientist would do. he tested the hypothesis. He injected laboratory animals with the BX agent. Tumors developed. He isolated the virus back from those tumors. He injected other animals, more tumors. He isolated it again. He repeated this process 300 times with identical results before considering the confirmation sufficient. He then discovered that the BX agent didn't have just one form, it had four. One associated with carcinoma, one associated with sarcoma, which Rife called the BY virus. Slightly larger than the BX, there was a form present in the blood monocytes of over 90% of patients, visible with standard microscopes when correctly stained, and a fourth fungal form. More than that, he proved these forms could transform into one another. Any of the four forms could be reverted to the original BX agent, the tumor-causing trigger, within 36 hours, simply by altering the conditions of the culture medium. This wasn't just a discovery about a specific ailment. It was a radical confirmation of pleomorphism. It was Rife stating, with 300 documented repetitions, that conventional medicine had been built upon a fundamental misunderstanding. In November 1932, Rife recorded the first written description of the characteristics of this biological agent in his laboratory notes. Those notes still exist. They were preserved by collaborators after his laboratory was destroyed. They describe in precise technical detail exactly what was found, how it was found, and how it was confirmed. Virginia Livingston is often credited today as the first researcher to identify the organism associated with human tumors based on papers she began publishing in 1948. Rife had done it in 1920, and his name does not appear a single time in Livingston's papers. Identifying the enemy was only half the battle. The other half was neutralizing it. And it was here that Rife made the discovery that would change everything. Every physical object has a natural resonance frequency, a specific frequency at which it vibrates when stimulated. When you expose that object to an external force oscillating at that exact frequency, the object absorbs the energy and begins to vibrate with increasing intensity until the vibration becomes too great for the structure to hold, and the object shatters. You've seen this happen with a crystal wine glass. A singer hits the right note at the right intensity for the right amount of time, causing the glass to vibrate until it disintegrates. It's not brute force, it's precision. It's the right note at the right moment. Rife discovered that microbes possess this exact property. He found that it was possible, using the correct frequencies, to make them literally explode, disintegrating from within without affecting a single healthy cell around them. He called this the mortal oscillatory rate, or MOR. He spent years mapping the specific frequencies that targeted specific organisms. Every pathogen had its own. The frequency for tuberculosis was different from the frequency for typhoid, which was different from pneumonia, which was different from the primary biological trigger of tumors. Think about the elegance of this for a moment. It's not a toxin that eliminates the pathogen. It's not radiation that burns the surrounding tissue. It's not surgery that cuts through the body. It's a frequency, invisible, massless, and non-toxic, that enters the body, finds the organism with that specific signature, and destroys it from the inside. While every healthy cell remains completely untouched, Rife built the generator that emitted these frequencies. The equipment became known simply as the Rife machine. Throughout the 1920s and early 1930s, he mapped frequencies for tuberculosis, typhoid fever, pneumonia, herpes, polio, spinal meningitis, staph, strep, and many others. More than 52 different microorganisms in total. In 1929, the San Diego Union published an article titled "Local Man Reveals Wonders of Microbial Life." It was the first press coverage of Rife's work. The journalist left the laboratory with the impression any reasonable person would have, that they were witnessing something that could change the world. And in his animal experiments, when Rife injected laboratory rats with the BX agent, creating tumors the size of golf balls, and then activated the device at the MOR for the BX. The tumors regressed completely. The subjects became free of the condition. In November 1931, something happened in Pasadena, California that, had you known about it, you would likely never have forgotten. At the estate of Dr. Milbank Johnson, professor of physiology and clinical medicine at the University of Southern California, board member of Pasadena Hospital, and one of the most influential figures in Southern California medicine, 44 of the most respected physicians in the United States gathered. The dinner had a name. It was called The End of All Diseases. It was a tribute to two men, Royal Raymond Rife and Dr. Arthur Kendall, the bacteriologist from Northwestern. These 44 guests were not alternative medicine enthusiasts. They were the very heart of the American medical establishment. Deans of medical schools, hospital presidents, heads of bacteriology from institutions like Mayo and Northwestern. The kind of people whose presence commanded silence in any room. They traveled to Pasadena to honor an inventor from San Diego who had never completed an MD, who had built his own instruments with his own hands, and who was claiming he had found a way to neutralize diseased organisms using electromagnetic frequencies. 44 of the greatest names in American medicine, at a dinner titled The End of All Diseases in 1931. Remember that number, that name, that date, because by 1939, only 8 years later, nearly all of those same 44 doctors would be publicly denying they had ever even met Royal Rife. But before that, there was 1934, and 1934 was the year a major breakthrough in the battle against tumors was finally achieved. In the summer of 1934, the University of Southern California, USC, formed a special medical research committee. Its objective was to oversee clinical trials of Rife's technology on actual human patients. The committee was composed of high-level medical professionals. It's worth naming each one, because these names are the difference between a mere claim and a documented historical fact. Dr. Milbank Johnson, committee chairman and former president of the Southern California AMA, Dr. Arthur Kendall, director of medical research at Northwestern University School of Medicine, Dr. Rufus von Kleinschmidt, president of USC, Dr. Alvin Ford, the pathologist responsible for diagnostic verification, Dr. Whalen Morrison, chief surgeon of the Santa Fe Railway, Dr. George Fisher of the Children's Hospital of New York, Dr. Kurt Meyer of the Hooper Foundation in San Francisco, Dr. Edward Copps of the Metabolic Clinic in La Jolla, and Dr. Zite, professor of pathology at the University of Chicago. This was not a team of enthusiasts. It was exactly the group you would assemble if you wanted the results to be respected by the most skeptical scientific world. 16 patients with terminal cases were brought from Pasadena County Hospital to Rife's clinic in La Jolla, north of San Diego. All 16 had been evaluated by conventional medicine and declared hopeless. With no treatment options remaining, the documentation described them as desperate. The treatment was strikingly simple in its execution. Each patient sat a few feet away from the Rife machine. They received 3 minutes of exposure to the mortal oscillatory rate of the BX agent. Then they left, returning 3 days later to repeat the process. 3 minutes. Every 3 days. Rife had discovered that the interval between sessions was as vital as the session itself. The 3-day spacing allowed the body to process the neutralizing of the organisms, a process that released toxins that the system needed time to eliminate. Daily dosing actually produced poorer results than spaced dosing. 90 days later, the Special Medical Research Committee met to evaluate the results. 14 of the 16 patients were declared clinically recovered. The remaining 2 underwent an additional 4 weeks of treatment. They too achieved a full recovery. The success rate, 100%. There were no middle grounds. No partial remissions, no significant improvements. It was a complete clinical resolution, documented by a pathologist, signed by 5 physicians. and supervised by the University of Southern California. One of the patients, Tom Knight, had a large, visible growth on his face over the malar bone of his left cheek. Its location made it possible to objectively measure the progress week by week. In September 1935, a year after the treatment, Dr. Johnson wrote a letter introducing Tom Knight to two San Diego physicians. The letter stated that Knight had been treated at the La Jolla Clinic the previous year for a facial carcinoma. The letter didn't need to say more. Anyone who met Tom Knight afterward saw the truth. His skin was flawless, no growth. No scar follow-up clinics in 1935, 1936, and 1937 confirmed the 1934 results. It worked repeatedly with different patients and different types of malignancies. In Rife's own book, published in 1953, he described the protocol with clinical precision. The first clinical work on cancer was completed under the supervision of Milbank Johnson, established by a special medical research committee of the University of Southern California. 16 cases were treated at the clinic for many types of malignancy. After 3 months, 14 of those so-called hopeless cases were certified as clinically recovered by the staff of 5 doctors and Dr. Alvin G. Ford, the group's pathologist. One of the physicians directly involved, Dr. Koch, described a patient brought to the clinic with a mass that had completely taken over the abdominal cavity. I put my hand on his stomach. It was a solid mass, a growth the size of my hand. I thought, there is nothing that can be done for this man. But they gave him the treatment with Rife's frequencies. And over 6 to 8 weeks, to my absolute amazement, he recovered completely. He became so well that he asked for permission to return to his farm in El Centro to tend to his cattle. This is not science fiction. This is not folk mythology. This is the testimony of a physician regarding a case he personally monitored. It should have been enough for the history of medicine to take a completely different path. It would have been enough if it weren't for a man named Morris Fishbein. Morris Fishbein was born in 1889 in St. Louis, Missouri. He studied medicine at Rush Medical College, an institution known at the time for having significantly lower admission standards than places like Johns Hopkins or Northwestern. He never completed his internship. He never received a formal medical license. He never practiced medicine. He never treated a single patient in his entire life. Yet, for 25 years, from 1924 to 1949, he ruled the American Medical Association, AMA, with an authority no other individual has ever held over American medicine. He was the head of the Journal of the AMA, JAMA, the most influential medical periodical in the United States, read by every doctor in every office and hospital in the country. It was the publication that decided what was legitimate science and what was fraud. It was the vehicle that made or destroyed reputations, and Fishbein owned it, literally. By 1934, he had acquired nearly all the stock of the AMA. The association that was supposed to represent American doctors belonged, in practical terms, to a single man who had never treated a patient. His contemporaries called him many things. Some called him the most powerful man in American medicine. Others, his critics, called him the medical Mussolini. The comparison wasn't just rhetorical. Fishbein exercised his power with the same combination of public charm, private intimidation, and a total willingness to destroy anyone in his path that defined the great authoritarians of the 20th century. The AMA's business model under Fishbein was revealing in its simplicity. Before 1962, pharmaceutical companies didn't have to prove their medications were effective or safe. What they needed was the AMA seal of acceptance, printed in the journal, so that doctors would prescribe their products. And how did a drug earn that seal? By paying the journal for advertising space. There were no independent tests. There were no laboratories. There were no researchers. There was only payment. The money went in. The seal came out. Before endorsing a drug, Fishbein and other AMA leaders would often purchase stock in the pharmaceutical companies involved. When the endorsement was published and the stock price soared, they sold for a profit. It was medical insider trading, executed so openly that it appeared normal. This was the man who, at some point between 1934 and 1938, learned of the existence of Royal Rife, and he sent an attorney to San Diego with a message. The message was simple: we want to buy in. We do not know the exact terms of the proposal Fishbein made to Rife. What we do know is what Rife said. He refused. Rife was not interested in money. He had made this clear on multiple occasions throughout his career. When offers from investors began to pour in after the 1934 results spread through medical circles, he turned them all down. When money comes in through the door, Rife used to say, science flies out through the window. This wasn't a pose. It was a conviction that defined how he understood his work. Research was for humanity, not for a corporation. The solution belonged to everyone, not to a shareholder. And Fishbein, who had spent decades buying what he needed and destroying what he couldn't buy, received that refusal as something he likely hadn't experienced often. A definitive no. To understand what happened next, it helps to know what Fishbein had done to Harry Hoxsey, another discoverer of an alternative treatment who had also rejected his offer. Fishbein's proposal to Hoxsey was this: the AMA would receive all profits for the first 9 years. Hoxsey would receive nothing. After that, if the AMA was satisfied with the results, Hoxsey would start receiving 10%. Total control for the establishment. 0 for the discoverer. Hoxsey refused. In the following 16 months, he was arrested 125 times for practicing medicine without a license. 125. With Rife, Fishbein needed a different approach. He couldn't arrest Rife for practicing medicine without a license. Rife wasn't a doctor and never claimed to be. A trial based on false charges would be catastrophic because it would force the defense to present evidence from the 1934 USC supervised clinic with its 16 documented recoveries. The last thing the industry wanted was a public trial over a therapy that showed a 100% success rate in terminal cases without using a single drug. So, Fishbein used the most effective strategy in his arsenal, buying off the Allies and dismantling the infrastructure. It is 1935. America is at the depth of the Great Depression. Unemployment exceeds 25%. Families are losing everything. People who once had brilliant careers are accepting any job they can find. In such a context, money does not have the same absolute value it has during periods of prosperity. It has more, much more. Dr. Arthur Kendall, Director of Medical Research at Northwestern University School of Medicine, one of the most respected bacteriologists in the country, and a close collaborator of Rife for years, received a proposal. We do not know the precise details of who made the offer or how it was phrased. What we do know is the result. Kendall accepted approximately $250,000 and abruptly moved to Mexico, where he purchased a ranch, $250,000 during the Great Depression. This amount would be equivalent to several million in today's purchasing power. And Kendall, who had spent decades building a remarkable scientific career, simply vanished. He dropped everything. He left the country. The Mexican authorities eventually took over the ranch later on. But that part of the story isn't the point. Dr. George Dock, another prominent figure who had collaborated with Rife, internationally recognized, and whose name appeared in journals and conferences worldwide, was silenced differently. He received a massive research grant and the highest honors the AMA could bestow. The kind of recognition a scientist spends a lifetime building, delivered all at once. With one implicit condition: and all involvement with Rife. One by one, the 44 physicians who had attended the 1931 dinner were, in various ways, pushed away. Some were compromised financially. Others were threatened with the loss of their medical licenses or their positions in the institutions where they worked. Others were simply intimidated by the prospect of being publicly associated with something the Journal of the AMA was about to label a fraud. By 1939, 8 years after the dinner titled "The End of All Diseases," nearly all of those 44 individuals were publicly denying they had ever even met Royal Rife. There was no legal ban. There was no criminal investigation. Only the silent mechanics of a very well-calibrated system of incentives. An entire generation of medical students would graduate from that point forward without ever hearing of Rife, his microscopes, his frequencies, or the 1934 clinical trial, an entire breakthrough, erased from the institutional memory of American medicine. But Fishbein knew that erasing the people wasn't enough. He also had to erase the evidence. And that is when things turned even darker. In March 1939, a laboratory in New Jersey that had been replicating Rife's work, independently confirming his results, caught fire. The curious detail, the scientist who directed that laboratory was visiting Rife in San Diego at the exact moment of the blaze. He was thousands of miles away. No one was in the lab. And yet the fire started. Every piece of equipment, every page of research, destroyed. Also in 1939, the Burnett Laboratories in New Jersey, which were also validating Rife's findings. Burned to the ground. Dr. John Burnett was a relative of William Timken, Rife's original patron. Again, all equipment and research were lost to the flames. In 1944, the Smithsonian Institution published a detailed report on the universal microscope, one of the most respected publications in the American scientific world, describing the instrument with technical precision and confirming its capabilities. Within 1 month of that publication, the primary prism of the universal microscope vanished from Rife's laboratory. No one could explain how. In that same year, 1944, Dr. Milbank Johnson, the man who had organized the 1934 clinic, created the USC Special Medical Research Committee and served as Rife's strongest institutional supporter for a decade, was about to call a press conference to officially announce the clinical trial results to the world. On the eve of that press conference, Milbank Johnson died, poisoned according to those close to him. His papers, every document related to his work with Rife, disappeared. The press conference never happened. In 1969, Dr. Elmer Nemes, a nuclear physicist and physician who had attempted to replicate parts of Rife's work with his own instruments, died in a hotel. The official version stated that his bed inexplicably caught fire while he slept. 2 deaths by fire, 1 by poisoning. Laboratories burned at strategically convenient dates. Documents vanishing during the week of major publications. Prisms disappearing from locked laboratories. In any other field, these occurrences would have triggered a massive investigation. In the American medical landscape of the 1930s and 40s, controlled by a man who also owned the primary means of publication, they simply weren't. Parallel to the strategy of direct bribery and intimidation, Fishbein used a third vector, the law. In 1937, Rife and a few associates established the Beam Ray Corporation, a company created to produce commercial versions of the Rife machine for use in clinics and medical offices. It was a way to bring the technology beyond Rife's personal lab, allowing more physicians to utilize the treatment. Philip Hoyland was one of the company's engineers and, according to later documentation, he was allegedly approached and bribed by agents of the AMA. In 1939, Hoyland sued the Beam Ray Corporation in an attempt to seize control of the company and oust Rife and the other partners. The lawsuit dragged on for months. Rife won the case, technically, but it was a hollow victory. The legal fees had completely drained the company's resources. The Beam Ray Corporation collapsed. And while the trial was ongoing, the AMA sent representatives to every doctor using a Rife machine with a direct message: return the equipment or lose your medical license. Most of them complied. Rife emerged from the trial financially ruined. Not by defeat, but by a victory that cost him everything. Something broke inside him during that trial. The testimony of his accusers, the mechanics of watching a system meant to defend the truth being used to obscure it. The realization that there were forces at play that could not be defeated simply by being right. Rife began to drink. Not occasionally, but systematically and progressively, like someone who found in alcohol the only thing that could numb the consciousness of what had been built and subsequently destroyed. The following years were a cycle of partial reconstruction and constant relapses. In 1950, Rife partnered with an engineer named John Crane, and together they tried to develop new versions of the technology. They built equipment, trained doctors, and distributed 90 units for testing. In 1960, the laboratories were raided. No warrant. All equipment and records were seized. John Crane was prosecuted for medical fraud, despite 14 former patients appearing in court to testify that they had been successfully treated by the technology. The detail that summarizes it all: the foreman of the jury was a physician and a member of the AMA. Crane was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Rife, this time, was left out of the formal proceedings. But the destruction was the same. His life's work once again had been erased. In 1960, Royal Rife signed an affidavit for a legal proceeding. It was a formal legal document, not an autobiography. Yet, the words he chose to describe his journey reveal everything about the inner state of a man who had been pushed to his limits. Having spent every penny I ever earned in my research for the benefit of mankind, I ended up in poverty, but I achieved the impossible, and I would do it all over again. He was 72 years old. He would do it all over again, even knowing what it had cost, even knowing what had been taken from him. Despite the alcohol, despite the loneliness, despite decades of work being deliberately erased, he would do it all over again. In 1957, his first wife, Mamie, passed away. In 1960, Rife married Amelia Aragon, his second wife. They lived together for the final 11 years of his life. On August 5, 1971, Royal Raymond Rife was admitted to Grossmont Hospital in El Cajon, San Diego, following a heart attack. The official cause of death was recorded as a fatal interaction between Valium and alcohol. He was 83. He was buried at Mount Hope Cemetery in San Diego, beside Mamie. The Daily Californian published a brief notice describing his passing. It stated that he had died in poverty, embittered by the failure of his devices to gain scientific acceptance. Embittered by failure. That was the epitaph chosen by a journalist for a man who had built, with his own hands, the most powerful microscope in human history. A man who had identified the primary biological trigger of tumors 12 years before anyone else received credit for it. A man who had overseen the recovery of 16 terminal patients in 90 days, with a 100% success rate, embittered by failure. It remains one of the most brutally unjust sentences in the records of scientific history. Let's pause here for a moment and ask the question that must be asked. If Rife's technology worked, and the available historical documents strongly suggest that it did, at least on a significant level, then what exactly was taken from us? In 1971, the year Rife passed away, there were 300,000 deaths from tumors in the United States. Today, decades later, that number exceeds 600,000 per year in the US alone. Globally, these conditions claim 10 million lives every year. 10 million, 1 out of every 6 deaths worldwide. Rife lived to see the phenomenal expansion of the American Cancer Society. He saw the birth of the Salk Foundation. He saw dozens of research organizations collecting billions of dollars over the decades for challenges that, from his perspective, already had an answer in that San Diego laboratory. The treatment industry, chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, and new biologics now moves more than $250 billion annually worldwide. It is one of the most consistently growing industries in the global economy. This growth isn't because success rates are increasing in equal proportion. For many advanced stages, improvement over the decades has been measured in months of survival, not in total resolution, but because the existing treatments are extraordinarily expensive. A single course of chemotherapy can cost anywhere from $10,000 to $300,000. Some newer biological treatments cost over $500,000 per patient per year. And they remain necessary because the condition hasn't been eradicated. It returns, it mutates, it adapts, it persists. I am not suggesting there is an active conspiracy today to suppress a universal solution. I'm not suggesting that the doctors, researchers, and scientists working in oncology are malicious. On the contrary, the people in the labs, the oncologists who spend decades learning to treat patients, the researchers who work 60-hour weeks trying to understand cellular biology, these are dedicated, intelligent people driven by a genuine purpose. The problem doesn't lie with those individuals. The problem lies in the incentive structure that defines which research gets funded, which approaches are considered legitimate, which results are publishable and which are silenced. A low-cost, non-patentable solution based on frequencies, as Rife's technology was, is simply not fundable under the current model. There is no return on investment structure that justifies billions in research for something that cannot be owned or patented. The system was not designed to produce that result. It was designed to produce another. And when, in 1901, the Journal of the American Medical Association published a statement saying that the growth of the medical profession needed to be curbed so that individual members could find a lucrative practice. That wasn't just rhetoric, it was policy. It was an explicit declaration that the organization's goal was not to maximize public health, but to maximize the earnings of its members. The AMA was created as a guild. It functioned as a guild, and the early leaders of that guild made decisions that still define, in significant ways, how American medicine functions today. But here is something that rarely appears in conversations about Royal Rife, and it is perhaps the most disturbing detail of this entire story, the physical principle behind Rife's technology, that organisms have specific resonance frequencies, and that exposure to these frequencies can selectively destroy them is being progressively validated by mainstream contemporary science, not by alternative medicine enthusiasts, but by physicists, biomedical engineers, and researchers publishing in peer-reviewed journals. In 2013, Professor Anthony Holland of Skidmore College presented at TEDx the results of experiments using oscillating electromagnetic fields to destroy leukemia cells in laboratory cultures. The results showed the selective destruction of cancer cells with minimal impact on healthy cells. The effective frequencies? Between 100,000 and 300,000 Hertz. Holland explicitly stated that the principle was the same as a singer shattering a crystal glass. It is exactly what Rife described in 1929. In research published over the last decade, techniques such as histotripsy, the use of focused ultrasonic pulses to destroy tissue at a cellular level without surgical incisions, have shown promising results against solid tumors in multiple studies. While the principle is mechanical rather than electromagnetic, the logic is analogous: precise frequencies to destroy diseased tissue without affecting the healthy. In 2020, the FDA approved Optune, a device that uses alternating frequency electric fields to treat glioblastoma multiforme, the most aggressive type of primary brain tumor. Optune works by generating oscillatory electric fields that specifically interfere with the division of cancer cells, leaving healthy, non-dividing cells relatively intact. It is frequency therapy, FDA approved in 2020. 86 years after Rife treated 16 terminal patients using electromagnetic frequencies in La Jolla, California, the FDA approved the first frequency-based therapy for cancer. In 1983, Researchers published laboratory confirmation that marine bacteria are capable of adapting and changing shape in response to environmental conditions, confirming the pleomorphism that Rife had documented decades earlier. In 1994, geologist Robert Folk demonstrated that carbonate precipitation in Italian hot springs was caused by modified bacteria of nanometric size, organisms smaller than what conventional microbiology believed possible. They were visualized using scanning electron microscopy. What Rife saw through his universal microscope, minuscule organisms in multiple forms, capable of transformation, is being gradually confirmed by contemporary science. Decades after he was labeled a charlatan, the story of Royal Rife is not unique. It is part of a pattern that the history of science repeats with enough regularity that it can no longer be treated as an exception. Ignaz Semmelweis was a Hungarian physician who, in 1847, discovered that doctors who washed their hands between autopsies and child delivery drastically reduced maternal mortality from childbed fever. In the wards he supervised, the mortality rate plummeted from 18% to less than 2%. He published his results. He presented them at conferences. He showed the data. The medical community ridiculed him. The idea that doctors could be causing the deaths of their own patients through a lack of hygiene was unacceptable to the professional identity of the class. Semmelweis suffered a nervous breakdown, was committed to an asylum, and died there from sepsis. Of all ironies, in 1865, decades later when Pasteur confirmed the germ theory, Western medicine realized Semmelweis had been right all along. But that realization came too late to save those who died from hospital infections during the years his idea was rejected. Barry Marshall, an Australian physician in the 1980s, believed that stomach ulcers were caused by bacteria, an idea the medical establishment completely rejected, insisting that stomach acid made bacterial growth impossible. To prove his hypothesis, Marshall famously drank a solution of Helicobacter pylori, developed gastritis, treated himself with antibiotics, and was cured. In 2005, he won the Nobel Prize in Medicine. Tesla, who designed virtually the entire electrical infrastructure of the 20th century with alternating current, died in poverty after Edison and Westinghouse waged wars over patents and credibility that left him without the resources to continue his work. The pattern is not conspiratorial, in the sense of requiring a secret organization coordinating every move. It is structural. When a discovery threatens an established economic model, the tools of suppression are the same ones available to neutralize any threat. Academic discredit, cutting of funding, lawsuits, and when necessary, the direct application of economic or physical pressure. The American medical establishment of the 1930s had all of these tools at its disposal, and they used them. In 1987, journalist Barry Lyons published a book titled The Cancer Cure That Worked: 50 Years of Suppression. It was the first time Royal Rife's story reached a broad audience through a commercially published work. Lyons spent years tracking down documents, letters, trial records, scientific articles of the era, and testimonies from those who had worked with or known Rife. What he assembled was more than a biography. It was a forensic reconstruction of how a set of discoveries had been systematically erased from the collective scientific memory. The book revived interest in Rife's technology. Communities of independent researchers, especially starting in the 1990s and 2000s, began attempting to reconstruct what had been destroyed. 3 original Rife machines were located. Technical blueprints drawn by Rife and John Crane were preserved. Smithsonian documents were rescued from archives. In 2004, the documentary The Rise and Fall of a Scientific Genius, The Forgotten Story of Royal Raymond Rife, was released. Directed by Sean Montgomery, it featured fragments of Rife's own 1939 laboratory film, some of the only existing footage of his work in action. At the San Diego History Center, there is a file that exists to this day under the name Royal R. Rife, Betrayed and Persecuted Humanitarian. This is a classification made by the institution itself, not by alternative medicine enthusiasts, but by the city where he lived, worked, and died. In 1987, federal judge Susan Getson Danner found the American Medical Association guilty of an unlawful conspiracy against the chiropractic profession. She concluded that the AMA had conducted a systematic, decades-long campaign to eliminate or contain their competition. She issued a permanent injunction against the AMA and ordered the trial's findings to be published in the AMA's own journal. This was not the first time the AMA was condemned for monopolistic behavior. In 1938, the organization was indicted for violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. In 1943, they were convicted and fined, a documented pattern, decades of precedent. And yet, the prevailing narrative still treats Rife's story as an urban legend. There is a question that always circulates in conversations about Rife, a question that deserves an honest answer, not an easy one. The question is, if a universal solution for such a major health crisis existed, would it really be possible to keep it a secret? It is a legitimate question. And the honest answer is, it depends on what you mean by secret. There is no smoke-filled room where pharmaceutical executives meet to decide which breakthroughs to suppress. There is no locked vault containing a master list of discoveries deliberately buried. That is not how the suppression of scientific innovation works. What exists is something more mundane and far more effective. An incentive system that directs resources, reputations and careers in very specific ways. A research project that cannot be patented cannot secure private funding. A therapy that doesn't use drugs cannot navigate the regulatory approval process the same way a drug would, because the process was designed for drugs. A result that contradicts the dominant paradigm is not published in the major journals, because those journals are funded by the very industry that the result threatens. It isn't a conspiracy, it is a structure, and this structure produces results that explicit conspiracies rarely could, because it doesn't depend on any single malicious individual. Every person within the system is simply following the incentives the system created. The end result remains the same. Certain questions are never asked, certain paths are never explored, and certain discoveries never reach the place where they could truly change the world. This does not exonerate Maurice Fishbein. Fishbein was explicitly malicious, driven by documented greed, and took deliberate, specific actions to destroy Royal Rife. That is a matter of historical record. But Fishbein was only possible because the structure around him allowed it. And that structure still exists today in evolved forms. Royal Raymond Rife deserved to have his name alongside Pasteur, alongside Koch, Curie, and Fleming. He deserved to have the universal microscope displayed in a museum, with his name on the plaque, visited by medical students from all over the world. He deserved to have the mortal oscillatory rate taught in every virology and oncology course. At the very least, he deserved for the technology he developed to have been tested under conditions that allowed for a definitive conclusion. A simple yes or no. It works or it doesn't, instead of being dismantled before that conclusion could ever be reached. He received none of that. What he received instead was an apartment above a garage that served as his lab. 40 years of grueling, solitary work, alcoholism as his companion for the final 3 decades, and a death in a hospital, alone and without recognition. And yet, there is the sentence he chose to describe his own life in 1960. At 72 years old, penniless, with his life's work destroyed for the second time, I achieved the impossible, and I would do it all over again. There is no possible interpretation of those words other than that of a man who believed until the very end that what he had discovered was real, was vital, and was worth the suffering he endured to try and bring it to the world. If he was right, and the fragments of evidence that survived suggest that he was, at least in principle, then what was taken wasn't just Rife's legacy. It was taken from every person since 1934 who passed away from a condition that might have been avoided. From every family that watched a loved one consumed by a disease while undergoing treatments that destroy the body in an attempt to destroy the mass. 10 million deaths per year, all around the world. I do not know if the Rife machine, if reconstructed today with total precision, would resolve the health challenges exactly as the historical records describe. No one knows, because the necessary conditions to find out were destroyed by a man who never treated a single patient in his life. What I do know is that the question was never answered honestly. The opportunity to answer it was deliberately eliminated. And that fact in itself is enough to demand that the story of Royal Raymond Rife be told, repeated, and remembered. So, what do you do with all of this? I'm not asking you to abandon conventional medicine. The doctors, nurses, and researchers working within the current system save lives every single day. 21st century medicine is extraordinary in its ability to manage pain, perform complex surgeries, and visualize the invisible. What I'm asking is for you to hold two thoughts in your mind at the same time. The first, that conventional medicine is a vital tool for humanity. The second, that the institutions governing that tool have a documented history of placing economic interests above genuine discovery. This is not speculation. It is in the court archives. It is in the antitrust convictions. It is in the records of the 1934 clinics that were silenced, not because they failed, but because they succeeded in a way that was economically inconvenient. One day, perhaps sooner than we think, someone will emerge with a discovery that radically challenges everything we know. The establishment's instinctive reaction will be to ridicule, marginalize, and suppress. When that happens, remember Royal Rife. Not to blindly believe every claim of persecution, for charlatans do exist, but to demand that the right questions be asked. Genuine science requires that experiments be conducted and results evaluated with honesty, not through the filter of return on investment. The only thing worse than believing in something false is destroying something true before the truth can be confirmed. Royal Raymond. Rife was a warning. He was a demonstration of how power can be used to protect profits instead of people. And that warning has no expiration date. He died in August 1971, penniless and unrecognized. But he left us with a spirit that cannot be erased. I achieved the impossible, and I would do it all over again. This story only survives because people like you refuse to let it fade into the shadows of history. If you believe that the truth belongs to everyone, and not just those who can patent it, help us spread this message. Hit the like button to tell the algorithm that this story matters. Subscribe to join our journey into the depths of human potential and the hidden truths of our world. And most importantly, share this video. Send it to someone who needs to know that impossible is just a word used by those who are afraid of change. Before you go, I want to hear from you in the comments. What other breakthroughs are currently hidden behind the wall of unfundable research? Let's start a conversation that the establishment can't ignore. Truth isn't always what we're told, but what we have the courage to discover. Click to join us and use the key that reveals the unseen.